Thank you very much indeed, dear Mr. Secretary General, dear Mark. I'm very glad that I was able to receive Mr. Secretary General at the Presidential Palace during his official visit of Slovak Republic as one of the North Atlantic Alliance member states. At the outset, make sure it's very clear, I'd like to emphasize that during our talks we've been very clearly saying that Slovakia is and will be a responsible NATO member state and has no interest in changing its international roots in both NATO and European Union. I'd like to thank Mr. Secretary General for very open and frank discussion, because the two of us have known each other for many years. We've sat together as prime ministers at the European Council's meetings. That's why our relationship allows us to speak very directly with no diplomatic shenanigans around. We do realize that the situation of geopolitics also within the security space has been changing dynamically. But our response, at least here in Europe, should not be some lamenting or complaining, what now? But we, NATO member states and the EU member states, here in Europe, we have to act actively, come with own attitudes and proposals how to resolve the situation, not to complain whether we are or we are not seated at some desk somewhere or not being able to co-decide about our future and that of our neighbor. May I open a few topics, then I'm sure later will be more commented by Secretary General. We have approaching a NATO summit in Hague, which will be preceded by talks of the B9 head of states, which increased defense expenditure, I'm sure, will be debated, or increased investment into our defense. There is an idea, some percentages, which will still be a matter of talks. However, we must admit, and Slovakia does admit this, that our armed forces have been built into peacetime. They were built in a way that, as though there would never be another war in our continent. So unfortunately today, this is what it looks like. The condition and the state of armed forces of European countries. And the war has shown us completely in a naked truth that our military forces are not ready here in Europe to face any threat, no matter where from such threat would come. I'm only saying in general. That is why it is a legitimate, open question to increase funding sources for armament of the North Atlantic member states, armies, militaries rather. Here in Slovakia, we look at this from a very pragmatic point of view. We all rely on Article 5, which says that in case of any attack upon a NATO member state, immediately remaining NATO member states come to help. We, from Slovakia's perspective, also look at it from Article 3, which first says that member states are supposed to first be able, through own capacities, capable of repelling any attack, and time will come before Article 5 is activated. And that's important to say to our citizens of our countries, that this is for their security. And it is our obligation, our duty, to build such armed forces capable of resisting any pressure from outside our borders. This is not only about pressure of some military attack. We speaking of counterterrorism. Also, major wave of migration pressures, which must be managed not just police, but the military as well. So we are facing a discussion, and there are two moments important for Slovakia, and I've discussed this with Mr. Secretary General. It is likely that it will be necessary to change fiscal rules of the European Union, which has already been announced by Madam President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in Munich. Because today the fiscal rules do not enable us, due to deficit and debt thresholds, to increase our defense expenditures. That's the first moment, must be preceding discussion about increasing investments into military. Second thing important for Slovakia will be what pace will be proposed by the alliance. In how many years we need to achieve the desired increase by 1 or 1.5% additional, and what pressure this will exercise upon our funding resources. Thirdly, a discussion what will be and will not be included into defense expenditures, such as, we mentioned this already, repairing a bridge. One cannot bear the weight of a tank, Leopard tank, for instance. Is it not possible to be included in those investments in the future? And the bridge logistically will enable our heavy equipment to be moved wherever is necessary. Another important question that we have discussed is that we cannot respond to every single word and sentence of our alliance partners immediately. One must always wait a little, not always be rash and going to panic. We have time to some more direct words of our alliance partners, to wait a little how to respond, because politics are changing on a daily basis. It's important for Slovakia, however, as we are on a border of a country in war, to settle this conflict as soon as possible. And Slovakia is an advocate, after the Munich conference, I mentioned this already, looking for a permanently sustainable peace. It is not in the interest of Slovakia to achieve ceasefire for some limited time, for resources to be regrouped, for countries to recover, and then again we would see a continuation of military conflict. In our opinion, it's premature now to speak of some kind of militaries or troops of European militaries of some countries who expressed interest to be deployed within Ukraine. We're still not there yet, in my opinion. We still must see some peace conditions and what the guarantees of sustaining such peace would look like. So that's why I must repeat that if Europe, even after the Munich conference, even after the words of representatives of US administration, has to act in more self-confident, without any fear. We are a large, major market, strong economy in the world, so we must not conduct activities that would divide Europe to multiple member state groups of these countries. Because Paris summit, ladies and gentlemen, has even created as though 3 groups of countries. Because, first of all, some countries could not even agree whether they are willing to offer their troops for any peace guarantees in Ukraine in the future. Second group of about 19, there was still some member states missing in this group, EU member states, including those who are neighboring with Ukraine, behind border of which there is war today. That's why I consider these type of talks quite unfortunate, so that we've agreed that with Mr. Secretary General in the future for countries to meet, to have similar opinions about placing troops somewhere, deploying troops, but not to undermine the unity of the EU, and even, I think, reducing the respect and also responsiveness of big world politics players. Because when they see our fragmentation and disunity, this is not helping us, as all have been calling after the Munich conference. We must just face it straight, all of these issues, not lamenting who is talking with whom or not. It's logical for us here in Slovakia that 2 major superpowers open talks, who have the power and diplomatic basic frameworks for future negotiations, have been set up. Of course, a part of these negotiations and talks always must be Ukraine in being involved in a conflict. But I'm convinced that through EU acting in a confidence, with own proposal how to make a contribution to sustaining peace, preventing war in the future, EU must be at negotiation table as well. But not through waiting whether someone will invite it, but through its own initiative and own attitudes, must demand to be seated at such negotiation table. If such EU leaders will not be able to present such position of the EU, we will be witnesses of peace be agreed without us. So I'd like to conclude by saying that I'm convinced that sustainable peace in Ukraine will not be possible without any security guarantees, for which also European Union will be responsible, of course, with the support of the United States, because without us, countries living on this continent, any solution could be very brief and unsustainable. So thank you once again, Mr. Secretary General. Many areas that we have discussed, there were really many more areas. Slovakia would like to see more Slovaks in the NATO structures of the NATO headquarters in Brussels. And Slovakia would like to seek the position of having in Slovakia a center of excellence for artillery fire, because Slovakia really is historically excellent expertise in this particular field, where we can test long-range artillery systems, where after some investments already we are producing a large number of ammunition of various types, where Slovakia is one of the leaders, in fact, in this region, in this regard, and many other topics that we have discussed were very broad-reaching, with the participation of Minister of Defense and Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I'd like to conclude really by saying, once again, Slovakia does realize its place in security strategy is to remain a proper, reliable North Atlantic Alliance member, while realizing here the moral investment debt into completing the equipment of our armed forces. But we're still facing a difficult time to agree on to what percent this needs to be increased for defense expenditures and how rapidly we need to get there. We still have member states among us we have not even got close to 2%. Slovakia has already achieved 2%, and in our next 3 years budgets, it's planning to retain the minimum of 2%. But we are open to talks to increase these resources. That will, however, require an intense domestic communication to be able to retain for our citizens complex services in healthcare, education and social system. On the other hand, to be able to guarantee one of the most important services, that's the security. That is the obligation of every government to provide, including the Slovak government. Thank you once again very much. Thank you, Mark, for coming. Thank you for being able to see this morning our excellent military training area, Lest, which is one of the unique facilities within the region, not just in Slovakia. And it's a training facility available to all of our alliance partners' militaries. And I believe that the know-how we've discussed today will be also shown in our next future very reliable and good cooperation.